full screen as well?
Not yet.
Oh.
Has it come?
Not yet. Okay.
Je me connecte. It's not in full screen yet.
Écran 2. I think now.
Yes, okay, it's in full screen now.
Okay, so if you want, Anna, you can start.
Yes, okay. Good morning, everybody. We will begin by introducing the CIMODIN project, which stands for International Circulations, Modes of Living and Urban Dynamics, explored in Bogotá and Quito. It's a project that was funded by the ICM, which took place between 2022 and 2025. On the following slide, if you can change the slide, please.
Yeah, sorry. Now it's okay.
Okay, yes. On this slide, you can see the research team and the various roles and held by each other and the different disciplines that compose the team. I am not sure whether you were able to read the text we previously shared with you about the circus project. Unfortunately, it's written in French, but we still wished to share it in the hope that you might have found modern ways to access and translate and understand it. We found that text interesting because it deals with what it practically means to conduct a fieldwork in a country from the global south in a post-colonial context. So this slide that you're seeing right now aims to clarify the positionality from which we designed this research, even if we did not pursue reflexivity to the same extent as the circus team did. In any case, we developed this project together with French, Ecuadorian, Colombian, Spanish, and Chilean colleagues, some of whom hold dual nationality. This had an impact on the organization of the work, on data collection, and on the partners' ability to circulate across different field sites, an issue to which we will return. We will begin by outlining the project's objectives and its main results, focusing particularly on the research choices we made along the way. We will then bring together a set of reflections on what it may mean in practical terms to attempt to build a concretely decolonial research posture. So our initial aim was to understand how migrants contribute to the production of cities, especially in Latin America. We observed that in the literature, the effects of international migration on urban dynamics are most often addressed in two ways. Either in the destination cities, through a classical literature on hospitality, urban integration, and ethnicity, with topics such as ethnic businesses, social spatial segregation, etc., or in the cities of origin, through remittances and the impact of these investments, particularly on job creation or on the construction and renovation of housing. However, the growing complexity of globalized migration flows calls for moving beyond this binary framework, and that's what we try to do in this project. If you can change the slide, please. So this is precisely what research in transnationalism emphasizes. You're probably familiar with this theoretical trend, which has been developing since the 90s. It emphasizes the plurality of places where migrants are anchored. This leads to specific forms of dwelling captured by the concept of living in migration, in French, l'habiter en migration, ou l'habiter. And it seeks to analyze the spatial experience of individuals and families embedded in a transnational space. It also invites us to consider circulations, people moving through activities such as tourism, studies, trade, that come to define migration social fields. Eventually, all these elements indicate the complex and diversified roles of migrants in the urban fabric, reflected in the literature on translocality or transnational urbanism. Another particularly interesting perspective in that attempt to unveil migration complexities in cities is the fact that the same city or neighborhood can simultaneously serve as a place of departure, arrival, transit, and return. This idea is developed in the second text we encourage you to read by Gioconda Herrera and Carmen Gomez. But they reflect upon this at the scale of the country. In our project, we aim to observe this convergence of migration patterns at the scale of cities or even neighborhoods. This may be observed in northern cities. Several studies deal with it in northern cities, but it is very spectacular in southern cities. It results in the sedimentation of successive migrations and sometimes even simultaneous ones. To capture this, it is necessary to combine approaches related to scales of place and temporalities. It leads us to question the traces left by migration, depending on whether the settlements are permanent or temporary. They will leave different traces and produce different urban materialities and social relations. It also requires being attentive to the temporalities of public action, whether they deal with migration or urban policies, and to urban change. These complex localized migration configurations also necessitate thinking about ethnicity, racialization, co-presence, competition, and recompositions, what we might call, following Stefan Vertovec, the superdiversity of cities through migration. The concept of arrival infrastructure, coined by Bruno Meus and Arnaud Carrel, seemed particularly useful for bringing together all these elements of analysis. If you can change the slide, please. Thanks. Based on these observations, we asked ourselves the following questions. What are the effects of these successive or intertwined migrations on urban space? What practices and investments contribute to the production of cities? But also, what about representations? We were particularly curious to explore the role of representations. Do migrants influence their surroundings, transmitting different ways of conceiving or practicing the city? For example, we made the hypothesis that return migrants, having experienced European cities, may appreciate to be near public transportation when looking for a place to live back in the country of origin. Finally, a broader question we would like to raise here relates to the thousand dimension. The literature on migration integration, or migration and urban change, to put it simply, is mainly focused on cities in the global north. But what about cities in the global south, which are sites of intense circulations? If you can change the slide, please. Thank you. Now let me present you our case studies in a few words. They correspond to two distinct migration and urban contexts. In the 2000, Quito, the capital of Ecuador, was a place of departure towards Europe and the US, when Ecuador was experiencing a series of crises. It has been, and still is, a place of arrival for internal migration, and today, international migration as well. It is the main destination for Venezuelan migrants in Ecuador. And I would like to say a few words about this migration from Venezuela. I put a map on the slide and a few figures. As a reference, since 2015, the massive migration of Venezuelans has completely transformed the region. In 2025, almost 8 million Venezuelans lived abroad, 85% of whom moved to another Latin American country. So it gives you an idea of the importance of that migration at the regional scale. Bogotá is 3 times more populated than Quito, with 9 million inhabitants. Historically, during the lasting conflict, it saw mainly migratory circulations, departures and returns of Colombians, displaced persons, etc., with very little international immigration. However, for the past decade, it has become the primary destination for Venezuelan migrants in the region. What roles do departures, returns, and international circulations play in the urban dynamics of these two cities? If you can change the slide, please. Move forward. Thank you. To analyze them, we adopted a methodology that we could describe as an ethnogeography of two neighborhoods. The first choice we made was to limit the study to a single neighborhood in each of these cities. We did not aim to establish a strict comparison because, as you will see, our case studies are quite different. Rather, we sought to create a dialogue between them. We conducted 3 field missions at 1-year intervals between 2022 and 2024. This allowed us to observe significant changes from 1 year to the other, 1 year to the next, especially in Ecuador, where these years saw considerable instability. And we also shared our fieldwork experiences. The Quito team came to Bogotá to visit the fieldwork in Bogotá and vice versa. In each neighborhood, we developed an ethnographic approach with observations, formal and informal interviews, and in Quito, an immersive experience in the neighborhood. We were lodged within a family who has a migration history. For this qualitative survey, we sought to identify households involved in international migration without focusing on any particular group. And to do that, we administered short questionnaires door to door or in public spaces so as to meet people with a migration background. When people we met had a migration connection, we systematically collected biographical data using the biographical matrix technique, and we conducted classic interviews to capture circulations, mobility, investments, residential trajectories, representations. When possible, we also interviewed family members of those we studied. In a few cases, adding a multi-sited dimension to the study, with complementary interviews in Otavalo, Paris, and Lille. We would have liked to further develop this multi-sited dimension, but it was not always easy. Another key focus was the physical changes in the neighborhoods. We sought to identify these changes using previous research for Bogotá, Google Map archives, observations from 1 year to the next, and testimonies. We paid particular attention to the construction of apartment buildings, new commercial premises, renovations of individual houses, and expansions or subdivisions of homes. To understand the dynamics of the real estate market, we collected and analyzed sales or rental listings with a precious help of our local partners, whose actuations as potential buyers or tenants was more credible. Finally, a last important aspect of our study, though we will only touch on it briefly here, was the analysis of national census data at the municipal and, when possible, neighborhood level. If you can move forward, please. Thank you. What do our study neighborhoods look like? In both cases, there are initially peripheral neighborhoods that, with urban expansion, have become more central or less remote. Both are located in the southern zone of the southern part of the cities, and both have been stigmatized as popular and dangerous areas. The first neighborhood on the left part of the screen, Ciudad Jardín in Bogotá, is well known. Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
It's okay.
So Ciudad Jardín is well known to a part of our team, who have been walking it, exploring it since the 90s. And you can see it on the map on the left. It is surrounded by a red frame. It is not considered an immigrant neighborhood, unlike its adjacent neighborhoods. You can see that on the second map. I guess it's not easy to read from a distance. So it is not considered an immigrant neighborhood, yet previous observations have shown that it is connected to several migration flows to Spain, to the US, Canada, Venezuela, and Ecuador. This is what influenced our choice of this neighborhood. The second neighborhood, Solanda in Quito, on the right part of the screen, is clearly identified as an immigrant neighborhood, especially since 2015, when it became home to many Venezuelans, to the point that it is commonly referred to as a Venezolanda. It's a pun on the name of the neighborhood. In the 2000s, it was also a place of departure to the US, Spain, Italy, and more occasionally to England or France. And during the 3 years of our study, it manifestly became a place of departure to the US again. If you can change the slide, please. Thank you. In terms of urban morphology, Ciudad Jardín is, as its name suggests, a garden city created in the 50s with large single-family homes and green spaces near a more industrial and commercial textile and leather production site. In the 1980s and 1990s, the neighborhood deteriorated and houses were subdivided. However, it has undergone other changes, which we may qualify as improvements. Some houses have been replaced by apartment buildings for middle-class residents. And today it is a relatively peaceful neighborhood, attractive to households willing to live in the southern part of the city, which, as we mentioned, is still stigmatized as poor and dangerous. Although it does not really apply anymore to Ciudad Jardín. Solanda is also a planned neighborhood with green spaces and single-family homes, but it was built later in the 80s and was initially aimed at modest households. The original one-story houses were all the same size, but over the years, owners expanded them by adding floors, a common phenomenon of self-building, autoconstruction. So, for instance, on the left photograph, that is the third one, starting from the left, you can see the house of Lola, our landlady. She initially lived on the ground floor, then added a floor above, moved to the first floor, rented out the ground floor as a commercial space, and later she built a second floor where one of her sons now lives. So this is a typical pattern in Latin America. But what is striking in this neighborhood is that the houses rise significantly, as you can see on the picture on the right. sometimes reaching 5 stories. Initially, we made the hypothesis that these larger houses belong to migrants. That's what residents indicated. But we will see that the reality is more complex. This verticalization of housing goes hand in hand with significant densification of the neighborhood, which now houses 200,000 people. The neighborhood became an important commercial hub for the southern part of the city in the 2000s, and today it is slightly diversifying socially with middle, lower, and lower class households. It is still a highly stigmatized area, more than Ciudad Jardín, where insecurity has been a recurrent issue since the 2000s.
Okay, I think now it's my turn.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Anna.
Thank
So
you.
here are some of our results. Maybe a bit dense, but we wanted to highlight some of them. So we begin by outlining the observed urban transformations. In both neighborhoods, we observe plural urban dynamics. So densification, it means adding new floors or subdividing existing buildings, and in Bogotá, Ciudad Jardín, replacing single-family houses with apartment buildings. We also noticed degradation of the initial built environment because of lack of maintenance, development of commercial or production activities inside residential units. We also noticed relative improvements because of the increasing centrality of those neighborhoods in expanding cities, thanks to the development of an efficient public transport offer, the metro in Quito and the bus rapid transit system in Bogotá. The improvement of public spaces such as bike lines, sidewalk parks, sports fields, etc. The new supply of quality apartments for middle-class households, especially in Bogotá, in Ciudad Jardín. And the growth of a diversified commercial offer. We also noticed informal transformations of the city, sometimes generating conflicts with the extension or creation of unregistered activity spaces, for example, and also the gradual disappearance of part of the original population, the founders, the pioneers of the two neighborhoods, through mortality and mobility, sometimes intra-urban moves or internal or sometimes even international migration. But yet in both neighborhoods, we noted a strong anchoring of some first-generation families. We looked for entangled migration forms. Here is what we found in terms of migration diversity. So both neighborhoods display marked social and migratory diversity shaped by contrasting and hierarchical migration profiles. With Solanda, in Quito, we observed the presence of vulnerable migrants, especially Venezuelan and Colombian residents and workers. In Ciudad Jardín, Bogotá, Venezuelan workers are also present, but resident immigrants tend, on average, to have a higher socioeconomic status. Both neighborhoods also host families with relatives living abroad who send remittances as well as return migrants. These different situations sometimes coexist in the same spaces, producing various forms of co-presence, more or less harmonious, and occasionally tensions or competition. In Solanda, for example, the co-presence of social or national groups such as Venezuelans in the same living and working spaces produces ambivalent representations. Xenophobia and feelings of insecurity fuel stigmatization of both the neighborhood and of certain populations perceived as not desirable. However, the arrival of new Venezuelan residents may also be accompanied by more neutral or even, in such cases, positive representations, free of prejudice. Nonetheless, persistent discriminations affects the most precarious groups, notably in access to housing, employment, or property. For example, in Quito, we observed some rental ads excluding foreigners, prohibido extranjeros. Faced with these dynamics, strategies of distinction emerge through everyday practices, naming, and representation. These strategies contribute to producing or reinforcing local forms of segregations through symbolic or material inclusion, exclusion logics, structuring relations between social and migration groups in urban space. Here we focus on urban insertion, highlighting how employment and housing opportunities in and around the neighborhoods facilitate migrants' insertion, and what these urban spaces offer to migrants. The studied neighborhoods function as arrival infrastructures, acting as intermediaries in migration trajectories. They mobilize networks of actors, resources, and practices that facilitate to varying degrees the settlement and insertion of immigrant populations. The migrant presence also transforms the urban landscape, as illustrated by the increasing visibility of Venezuelans in Solanda, with the nickname Venezolanda. Access to employment also follows differentiated logics. In Solanda, the commercial centrality of the neighborhoods constitutes an opportunity for migrants with few alternatives. Whether in Ciudad Jardín, migrants can enter more diversified employment forms, formal and informal, sometimes integrating into the local economic fabric. These differences reflect varied residential trajectories shaped by economic resources, social status, and symbolic aspirations. Settlements is often facilitated by affordable housing or by pre-existing family or community networks. We indeed observe the high social diversity linked to very different housing access conditions across the two neighborhoods. In Solanda, which is the most popular lower class area between the two neighborhoods, rents remain relatively affordable within the neighborhood itself, enabling settlement for low-income migrants. In Ciudad Jardín, rents are moderate on the periphery of the studied area, while the more expensive middle-standing offer within the neighborhoods attract higher status migrant households, sometimes as part of a distinction strategy. As migrants gradually insert themselves, they sometimes become actors of urban change. And these urban effects of migration can be long-lasting. Return migration also contributes to neighborhood dynamics, family and social ties, as well as place-based identity shape decisions to return. In Solanda, return often concerns migratory trajectories perceived as less successful and takes place in or near the original neighborhood. We also observe the emergence of local migration cultures. In Solanda, urban infrastructures foster mixed social networks between Venezuelans and Ecuadorians, sometimes prompting new departures. We have an example. An Ecuadorian seamstress made clothes for Venezuelans and other nationalities who wanted to leave Ecuador for the US via the Trocha, via the Darien, the Colombian Panama frontier. In Ciudad Jardín, former networks of Colombian emigration are reactivated, reinforcing transnational ties and the anchoring of migratory circulation within the neighborhoods. So our main entry wasn't institutional. We wanted to focus on the autonomy gaze and on the migrant actors' perspective, but we noted their influence on local urban and migratory dynamics. Public authorities played a foundational role in planning and developing. Land delivery in Ciudad Jardín in the 50s and construction of piso techo houses in Solanda in the 80s are emblematic examples. Urban plans also encourage verticalization by authorizing construction of multi-story buildings on former plots. Transport infrastructures, Bogotá's bus rapid transit, and Quito's metro in the 2020s helped bring these formerly peripheral areas close to urban centers. However, such developments may sometimes be perceived as threats by residents, construction damage to the original built fabric, housing demolition in Quito. Migration policies of northern states, the US and Europe, also have indirect effects on the studied neighborhood through return trajectories or remittances. International organizations such as the IOM and the UNHCR play a more direct role in orienting and managing migrants, even on the local urban area. Local authorities and associations also provide essential social support especially through structures like Casa Somos in Solanda or community health programs around Ciudad Jardín, which offer services and activities to residents, including sometimes foreigners. A set of intermediate actors, businesses, developers, architecture firms, real estate agents, neighborhood WhatsApp groups, and even mafia groups also actively reshape the neighborhoods. I don't know how much time do we still have?
15 minutes.
15 minutes?
If possible.
Maybe Anna, you want to read the
Yes.
conclusion? Yeah.
Thank you, Celio. I will read some of the conclusions. So to conclude, we aim to highlight the contributions and limitations of our methodological and theoretical approach, particularly the insights gained from selecting very different field sites. We were able to juxtapose two metropolitan areas and two neighborhoods that play different roles in migration circulations. Which proved interesting because it allowed us to observe different regimes of visibility, for instance, in these different neighborhoods, depending on the attractive the residential and commercial function of the neighborhoods, but also on the social profile of the migrants. With this study, we experienced an intensive, multi-sited and diachronic accumulation of materials. By returning to the field every 15 days for 3 consecutive years, we gained familiarity and negotiated access to the sites quite effectively. This repeated data collection allowed us to observe rapid urban changes and the effects of economic, migratory, and security-related contexts. And it was very visible in Solanda, which shifted from being a place of settlement for, especially for Venezuelans in 2022, to being a place of departure in 2023. And then another important change in 2024 was the arrival of the metro. We will not be able to fully grasp the consequences of that last change in the neighborhood because the study came to an end. We have thus gathered an important body of data from both locations, which still need to be analyzed for broader generalizations. Just a few words about the issue of insecurity. It was a significant component of the study in Quito, in particular. It has been a very unpleasant experience for us, but it also allowed us to better understand residential choices and spatial practices of migrants and their surrounding and their siblings, as insecurity is a part of their daily lives and decisions. On a more theoretical aspect, with this project, we try to pay attention to the different forms of mobility, ranging from transgenerational migration trajectories to daily mobility, including intra-metropolitan residential mobility. And that proved to be quite a heuristic approach. The spatial practices of cities are very differentiated depending on social mobility trajectories. We entered through materialities, and that enabled us to capture changes in the built environment, the practices of the inhabitants, the urban planning, for instance. And it also led us to see the importance of informal aspects of the cities for the integration of the workers, as for access to jobs or access to housing, the importance of the informal economy proved very important in both cities. However, the focus on representations, which was one of our objectives, proved challenging to exploit. The transmission of ways of dwelling between migrants and their families was difficult both to collect and to analyze. Another proposition of our project was to not necessarily approach migration itself, but rather urban change, paying particular attention when migrations were involved. This allowed us to shift our perspective and avoid over-interpreting the role of migration. It is just one of many dynamics in the neighborhood, and that's one of our important results. It plays a subtle role in the morphological transformation of neighborhoods. Migration plays a subtle role, but it's not the main explanation for how these neighborhoods evolve. If you can change the slide.
Okay. Okay, so now the idea is to shape some reflexive insights on our research positionality in relation with the gaze of this seminar. So we choose to enter the neighborhood through a single area without visiting other study districts. So the two districts are intermediate neighborhoods rather than the lower class peripheral areas typically analyzed by local university who send their students to see the auto constructed neighborhoods. Our objective was to prioritize the methodology, how we design the research framework rather than emphasizing results. So we defend an urban approach instead of a cultural or ethnic one, even if in places like Otavalo, which is a region of Ecuador, where there was a high immigration rate through to many foreign countries, including Bogotá, which we could have developed an ethnic approach, but we didn't. Some of us share life experiences with our interviewees, Colombian or Ecuadorian migration histories, similar middle-class backgrounds, which reduces the distance generally assumed between researchers and researched. Although based in the global north, some team members faced resident permit issues during the project, reminding us of our own exposure to border regimes. After years of left-wing nationalist policies in Mexico and other countries such as Ecuador, there seems to be also less difference, I don't know the pronunciation in English, difference toward white European researchers, especially regarding field access. There was little particular interest in our research among some of our colleagues in the global south. They did not expect much from our findings, whereas we initially expected much more from theirs. That was for us the signal of the end of the colonial fantasy of asymmetrical academic desire. So we are not theoreticians, we are more like empirical data collectors, but we noticed we are living in an ongoing epistemic revolution, the decolonization of the gaze. So we designed this project while the shift was unfolding without having fully mastered decolonial theory, and the absence of decolonial authors in our early bibliographies is a symptom of this. So we read a bit some of the main names, papers of this scientific approach. So Ramon Grossfogel's critique of Western epistemic domination applies, but we noticed in our own case that the domination is also material with funding, mobility, and the asymmetrical motility allowed by passports, so European passport versus Latin American passport. Aníbal Quijano emphasizes south-north migration flows, while we also try to analyze south-south and north-south return migrations. And in the case of Spivak, she argues that Western scholars often speak for subaltern subjects. In our case, we are not entirely external to the experiences of the people we study because our own trajectories are shaped by migration histories. We wanted also to insist on the autonomy of migration as both as a methodological and ethical stance. Migrants display subjectivity and agency, especially in neoliberal urban settings. So what do we have to say about reciprocity, ethics, and relation with participants? We try to reflect on reciprocity with interviewees. In some cases, friendly relationships developed, such as in the case of Lola, who was mentioned by Anna, and we provided assistance in some cases, where in the case of a young Colombian woman, an au pair, who was exploited in France. We tried to help her when she contacted us. We also transported gifts between family members, facilitating transnational ties. But we did not yet fully explore the dimensions of restitution or co-production of knowledge. Last slide. So all team members had opportunities to conduct fieldwork in both cities and to travel to Europe via the Simodin project. And for us, that was really important, not only us to go there to do fieldwork, but also them to go to Paris. It was a form of material compensation that goes beyond research needs. Of course, we're motivated by research, but it's not the only interest of traveling. Several Latin American colleagues are pursuing or will pursue PhDs in migration or urban planning. And I can mention Gloria Ramirez, which is now doing her PhD in the Sorbonne. So about academic mobility, south to north and north to south, south to south. For us, this transnational academic mobility is essential for reducing asymmetries and sharing privileges, even if we cannot fully repair them. And it's interesting to see the migration experience in the own biographies of the decolonial main theorists. It is noteworthy that all three major decolonial theorists, Ramón Quijano, Grossfogel, and Spivak, have their own migratory trajectories. Quijano taught in Peru, and then the US. Grossfogel is from Puerto Rican origin and teaches in California, and Spivak was born in Calcutta, India, but teaches at Columbia University in New York. And we wanted to also insist at the end of this presentation on the structural constraints we are facing now, the attacks on social sciences that also affect academic mobility. So our efforts occur within a political context of ideological and financial attacks on social sciences, especially on migration and gender studies. Academic resources are always more limited and mobility programs are threatened. In my university, in our university actually, the administration proposed to increase the tuition fees for non-EU students, which for us represent a discriminatory policy. And so one of the way we can try to follow to expand academic mobility is to organize resistance against this reform. And also mention the academic circulation through online meetings adapted to the time difference. In the transnational research team, one of our Ecuadorian colleagues had a full-time job and no time for research except during weekends. So we tried to adapt our schedule to hers, and it is interesting to see that it was successful experience because the first article accepted for the publication within this project was written entirely by the Latin American team, a meaningful sign of rebalanced authorship. And maybe just to show you the international conference we ended the project in last June. It was in Paris. So we have several panels, and that's in red in the slide, how we try to reduce asymmetries, also organizing urban walk here in Aubervilliers. on migration and urban change. So it was interesting to see our colleagues from the Global South observing the migration and urban experiences here in Aubervilliers, in this former deindustrialized area, which is now dedicated to academics and other activities. We also try to auto-organize simultaneous translation in, I think it was Farsi or Turkish, Spanish and French, and all the slides were in English. And here you have our non-decolonial bibliography, which we will try to adapt to all the new frame of this seminar. So I don't know how it's how we're supposed to do. Is it like an exam we have?
It was a very dense and interesting talk. You already have one reaction from Gianni D'Amato, but I think we can keep it for later on for the discussion. Now we will have a 5-minute break for material necessities, and then we split in working rooms for 20 minutes. And so we shall come back all online for Q&A with our two speakers around 11:30, because thank you so much for sticking to the time, except for all the, in spite of all odds, and there are many today. Thank you. If I'm right, Hélène, you correct me.
Yes, all good. Maybe not take 5 minutes as usual, but if all the students are back by 10 past, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. So you have 3 minutes. So what about the splitting analysis? I don't know how to do.
Sorry?
What about splitting in rooms? I don't know how to do. I don't know what shall I do today, now.
Well, I mean, I can do it if it's easier for you.
I would really be grateful. I told you I wanted to connect and I could not because this room was locked. It was a bit nightmarish.
It's okay. We'll make it work.
You're my favorite expert.
Thank you so much.
And it is still a recording, so can you maybe stop the recording or something?
Oh yeah.